Welcome to Launch Stories. We're all about connecting and educating Chilliwack entrepreneurs, so we really appreciate you all coming out. How many new people today? Perfect. Fantastic. Well, thanks to our sponsors for helping us put on these monthly events. We've got the Chilliwack Economic Partners Corporation, CEPCO it's known as here in Chilliwack, and the Chilliwack Innovation Network. So thank you very much. And thanks to Stalo Community Futures through a grant from CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. They've been a sponsor of Launch Stories for coming up a year, and we certainly appreciate their support. And thanks to our partners for organizing this monthly event. We've got Cowork Chilliwack, Currency Marking, and Zynim Ventures. And Colin is in the audience here. He's been my chief recruiter of speakers and so forth. So thank you so much for being involved. Let's hear it for our partners. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest this evening. He is the founder and president of Rainbow Greenhouses. Please give a warm Launch Stories welcome to Stan Vander Waal.
Well, Tim,
Good to see you.
I did bring a live plant because I'm
Yeah.
really disappointed
Fair
to
enough.
see that.
Fair enough.
I thought, here we are. We're in this, challenging time where, environment's very important, sustainability is kind of critical, and Tim, when we came here, it's like I was kind of pained by the fact that you had these plastic plants, but one thing I did do is I brought some plants for each one of you, so I expect each one of you to take a plant home with you tonight and enjoy it. So,
well, thank you. Well, Stan and I serve on a board together, and I finally got up the courage to ask him would he come and be on this show, and he immediately replied and just jumped right into action. So I really appreciate you saying yes. I've been hounding you for other things over the years, and I thought, one more time, this will do it. And sure enough. But before we get started, for those that don't know you, can you give us your elevator pitch of what Rainbow Greenhouses does?
Oh, man. So first of all, we grow flowers. That's our key mission. And so we grow flowers, and we sell our flowers at Costco, Home Depot, Walmart, IKEA, and a whole bunch of independent garden centers, shipping from I want to say all the way from Southern California and sweeping all the way to Thunder Bay. So if you take that arch, that's our business. We started as a very small business, and today it's a little bit bigger.
Wow, fantastic. Well, going way, way back, you were born in Somerville, New Jersey. I would never have guessed that. You did say I do. Didn't you get the American accent a little bit? And now that you said it, I do. But tell me about living in Somerville, if you have any recollection.
My wife is far better at remembering things than I was only 2 when we moved from Somerville, so I can't really tell you much. We did go back there at one point. I think it's probably about 10, 15 years ago, and just to see what it looked like. It was beautiful.
And your dad immigrated from the Netherlands to the U.S.
Correct.
What brought him to the U.S.?
Well, I think it was the floods, war, all those kind of things. It was a difficult time in the Netherlands, and I think the family decided they really wanted to go and try something new and really have an opportunity, and they saw that in the U.S. or North America.
Wow. And you're, I believe, the oldest of 10 kids.
Correct.
Yeah, so I can't even imagine what that looks like. I have one brother. I have one brother, and that's twice as many as we need.
Sometimes more can be better.
Yeah, fair enough. And he was in farming?
Yes, he was. Yeah, so we did a combination of dairy, crop farms, and this was in the Midwest, and in Iowa is where we did the farming.
Wow. And then over time, you made your way to Rosedale, British Columbia.
Correct. What
brought the family from the U.S. to Canada?
Probably the key thing was my dad actually was, at that time we were in a church community in Iowa, and our church community was looking to build a school. And they decided not to do that there. So they did it here in Chilliwack. So actually I went to Timothy Christian School. So at Timothy Christian is where our family came, and that was a big part of my dad's mission. And he was also looking then also to expand into a different business, which was flowers instead of farming.
Interesting. So the Iowa-Rosedale connection, tell me a bit more about that. How is that like a sister city or town?
No sister city. And, where I grew up in Iowa, it was farm country. It was soybeans, corn, and cattle, and so we were dairy farmers there. And so when we came here, quite different. It rains here. It didn't do that so much in Iowa. So Dad decided with this much rain, you just can't be a dairy farmer, is what he felt.
And so from the get-go, he was an entrepreneur. He started Rainbow Greenhouses, and that got, I imagine that would be one of the benefit of having 10 kids, would be some help around the company, obviously.
Yeah, so actually, Dad actually started Rosedale Greenhouse, so that's our Rosedale facility. So Wilma and I started Rainbow Greenhouses, some years later, and being the oldest one, I think Dad kind of looked at this and he said, Stan, I think you should get out on your own. So he actually helped us get started.
So that brings us to Rainbow Greenhouses, which you founded in '86. So if I do my math correctly, you've got a 40th anniversary coming up in a couple years here. But did you ever imagine, I imagine on one hand that feels like overnight, and then also the longest time ever, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about the origin story of Rainbow.
So it started very small. So we started as buying and selling products is what we did. So we first built our first greenhouse actually in Rosedale. So it was just off of Yale Road, and it was one small greenhouse. We did that kind of when we were still working for my dad at that point at Rosedale. So that's when we began Rainbow Greenhouses, and Rainbow Greenhouses then morphed into buying and selling of plants, selling into the Seattle marketplace, and later on into the Peace Country as well. So here you can see the picture of our very first place with the first greenhouse. So that's how it all started right there. And you might remember, where did the name come from? Everything in Chilliwack was Rainbow Country at that time.
Right. And I was remarkable when I went, oh yeah, we used to have 7-digit phone numbers. So small, in fact, you could put it twice on the sign.
There you go, exactly.
And here's another picture of, I believe that's you out in front, right?
Yeah. It was a little wet when we did that. I think we were trying to get a sign in there and try to get a face to what was going on.
So what road is this?
That is Yale Road.
That is Yale Road.
Yale Road,
okay.
On your way to Rosedale. That's just after Chapman Road.
Got it. Huh. And so you had a retail component to the business where people were driving down Yale, I guess, and they would see that they could come. But your big thing that you did for also your father in then early days was you drove truck. And you were out on the road. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so a big part of my job was delivering the flowers for my dad at that time. And so one of the things I did is I would go to Seattle with the flowers and deliver. That was usually had to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning. So it was a bit of an early start. I did struggle sometimes getting up on time. But so I took these flowers down, and that was my opportunity to kind of talk to our customer at that point. And so I was both the delivery person and kind of the liaison in sales. And I learned to connect with the buyers down there and try to understand why they bought somebody else's stuff versus ours. And so it was a real learning curve for me, and I really enjoyed it.
And from the very get-go, this was always a partnership. You are the co-founder with your wife, Wilma, who's here in the audience today, right front and center. Tell me about that partnership, both life partner and business partner, and how you've navigated that.
So Wilma and I have our 40th anniversary this summer, so we're looking forward to that. So that, I think that speaks to the success. We've had a great run together. Yes. And I want to say, we just kind of did things together, everything we did. So first of all, we met in the greenhouse by my dad, actually, and that was where we met each other. So that's when we started dating, and later on we got married, bought this place in Rosedale, and I guess probably entrepreneurship was probably part of me, I guess, from early on. And so I enjoyed challenge. We probably always did more than we should have done. It was always a little more than we should do. But it was just kind of the excitement of a challenge in that. And that was where this all began. This was on the side from my day job.
Oh, okay. Got it. They say a great partnership has two people with very different skill sets. If you were to describe Wilma's skill versus your skill, where are both of you strong?
Detailed, thoughtful, more cautious.
I'm taking that's probably Wilma.
That's Wilma. Yeah. So I'm a little bit less detailed. I'm kind of a get her done. I'm a road driver. I've got more energy. What do you always say, dear? You always say that I think the big comment is that I'm an eternal optimist.
Yeah, I can see that. Just in there doesn't seem to be any mountain that you're not willing to climb or tackle, and it's just remarkable. And so this is a picture of you on the road doing your deliveries. And so you did that for Rainbow early on too, trying to set up retailers that would take your product. And what did you learn during that time?
Yeah. So this was a really fun time. So this was us. This is me driving, an 18-wheeler, I guess you could say, at that time. We went and delivered flowers all the way to the Peace River country, and started with Prince George, went all the way up into northern Alberta there, and stopped at 40 customers along the way. So it started with a few less customers, but probably the lesson I learned early is we technically bought this delivery route system, you could call it, or buying and selling products from another person, and he did a good sell job on me, and he convinced me that he was making $1 gazillion and I should just take it over. So we did. Long and the short of it is I just didn't seem to hit the sales numbers from the beginning. They just weren't very good. So I had to kind of look after the second trip and say, this isn't going to go very good unless I figure it out. So I kind of went to the customers and I asked them, I said, why is it that I'm not getting your orders and you're buying them from this competitor of mine and that? And they said, well, first of all, your price is too high and your quality just sucks. So I said, okay. So I had to change that. So first thing we did is we reinvented the price list. So my wife was really handy with the typewriter and all those good things. We had those old kind of typewriters, right? So she typed up the new price list, and we changed our business model to reflect what the customers were looking for, better quality products. And 6 months later, the truck wasn't big enough. It was great.
And what were the early products? These were annuals, perennials?
Yeah. Mostly indoor plants. So at that point, we were very focused on selling to, example would be Brian Minter here in town. That was the type of customer we'd go to. We would go to a lot of the small flower shops. And so we'd grow plants like this. These are the kind of plants that we would sell. So we'd sell them to a combination of florists. And then later on, we were successful getting into some of the Safeways and IGAs as well.
And how did the sales background come? Was that just by sheer determination, trial and error of okay, I botched that one, I'm going to figure out the next stop's going to be better?
Yeah. So that was that's probably the most interesting thing, and there's probably some different opinions of how that sales came. So my wife would say that you are a born salesman. That's the term. We have many discussions around born salesman, whether you're born or whether you're made salesman. I like to think that I learned it, because I really struggled with it, actually. I did a lot of, I actually did quite a few courses in that to try to learn how to sell. And I can remember some of the trips, and I can remember very clearly going to Hinton, Alberta, and I was hitting some flower shops in Hinton. And I went into some of these flower shops and trying to sell these flowers, and I'd walk out with just 0 orders. And I remember very clearly one of the classes I took was focused on how to sell, but also what happens when you're not successful. And there was a thing called the back door. How do you then reopen the door, get back to the customer, and effectively make a sale? So I did a lot of learning, and it was really, it was fun because of the fact that it was a challenge every time. And of course, you always have this feeling that you're going to go in and customers just going to think, man, this guy's got the most wonderful product, and you're going to sell them. But it doesn't always work that way. There's a few other factors involved.
This is you and Wilma at the desk. I think that's an early fax machine, an early PC, it looks like. And really, it began to scale. So we talked about that start in '86. And then things started to ramp up. There was more than just you driving, I imagine. Yeah. And you started to expand, and you found some property on South Sumas. How much acreage was that?
That was 80 acres at the time, and it was a company that had gone into bankruptcy.
Wow. And what was being done on that property?
It was a combination. It was an old dairy farm, which was obsolete and, let's just say, toast. And secondly, it was a greenhouse operation that was in a state of large disrepair.
And so this was 94, approximately 8 years into the business, and you're looking at buying 80 acres. I can't even imagine how much land that is. How did you broach the capital issue? Obviously, you needed to come to a bank with a business plan of some sort, and
Yeah. So definitely wasn't our business plan, but I had an uncle that was actually also from the U.S., and him and I actually really connected well. And he was a real mentor to us in a lot of ways, and he understood business opportunities. He understood how to grow a business and that, and he was the one who actually came up with the idea of Wilma and I buying this place together.
Okay.
So he felt that it was probably it was an opportunity. Obviously, it was in a bankruptcy state, and there was something there, and he felt that if we cleaned this place up and made it, improved it, we could basically turn around and flip it. That was his idea.
And so you started to build, and this is one of your first greenhouses. Interestingly, Rob, who's behind you, I showed this slide deck to my wife, and she said, he used to rent a room from me. Yeah. And so that was a really weird connection about 20 plus years ago. So, but tell me about this phase. Like what did it, when you started to see these greenhouses coming up, was there any, like you just seem to exude confidence, but there's got to be a moment where you're like, who am I trying to fool here? Like,
yeah, it's interesting you say exude confidence, right? So I think maybe it's what you don't know can hurt you. I don't know, but I think one of the big things that I think of a lot is we were never really focused on what you call bottom line or just making a profit. It was I want to say in a lot of ways it was always the challenge is more about of delivering on an opportunity. And that was a big part of it. So here, this picture here, what we're really talking about, this would have been in 95, correct? Yes, I think it would have been 95. So this is our biggest build at the time. This is a pretty big expansion. We actually had done a lot of little things along the way, and as your cash allows you, you do bigger things when you have more cash to do it. But we always I want to say we were always short on cash. We never had enough. All those early years, certainly it was always a matter of just saying, how do you pay the bills? My wife can definitely speak to the stories of, as I was asking her about this, said, how was it in some of those early days? Well, she said, sometimes I had $50 that I had to buy groceries with, and it was just, I had to make it work. And that was a reality, right? So this was a time in this picture, you're seeing a little bit more of, we were beginning to be a little bit more successful, and I could say there was some financial security. I wouldn't call it a lot of security yet. There was still a lot of, and those first 15 years were like that, right? So this was our first big expansion. Wasn't a big, huge business plan yet. That kind of came later.
Mm-hmm. Along the way, you started to pick up, you probably recognize some of these logos, folks. If you've bought plants from Walmart, Home Depot, Costco, or IKEA, you've likely bought rainbow plants. And that started how?
So that would have started in around, I want to say 97, 98 in that area. So our first, what we call them the big box stores. The first big box store was Home Depot. And I called these guys relentlessly to try to get a hold of them because you want to get a chance to talk to them. And finally I got through, and I managed to make a connection with a buyer from Home Depot, and they had 2 stores in the Fraser Valley at that point. So that's all they had at 2 stores. There's 28, I believe, in British Columbia now. So quite a different change there. But anyway, so we started, and I actually got the first, what we call PO, handwritten. And that was the first real commitment we had. And for us, that was a huge win, because at the time we were selling largely what we call spec. You'd grow the product, not really having an end game sale plan. And you would just simply try to find a sale, where this allowed us a certain way. Well, now we could build the business because now we had an order. And when you have an order and you got a fixed price, you have a final, you know how it's going to pencil out a little bit.
I've heard that getting some of these companies is the best of your life and potentially the worst day, depending on your ability to service that new contract. Yeah. Did you have to go into expansion mode, or with the existing footprint, were you able to service these orders?
Yeah. So definitely that last picture where we looked at the expansion there, that would have been in need to fill the orders for some of the big customers. So there's no question that you could say there are challenges dealing with the big box stores. There's no question about it. And they're sophisticated in their buy-in systems, but they can also really help you grow your business. And I think the key thing is as a business owner, it's kind of our job to manage, you could say, the returns we get and what prices we need to sell for. And that's a negotiation process. It is with a big store as well. So there's obviously more challenges because they like to do volume discounts. There's many different incentive plans, you could say, to do more with them. But we did very well with all these brands, and we still work very solidly with them today. So, I mean, we have really enjoyed it. And I would go so far to say we've been Partner of the Year with Home Depot on probably, I believe, at least 3 different events and got some of the highest business partner awards with Home Depot. And they refer to it as a partnership, and so do we. And I think that's how I would sum up our relationship with any one of our customers. It's truly about a partnership. It's finding the win-win for both.
And along the way, I know you transitioned into having seasonal workers that actually worked in these stores. My son, for example, he had a job between his first year or graduating and going to university, and he worked at the local Walmart. And he said he loved the job, but it was his job to keep these plants looking tidy and alive, basically. Was that from the very start, or when did that program come into effect?
That would have come later. I want to, again, I'm not the great one with the years, but I'm going to say we started what we call merchandising is what we did. This is in-store, making sure the stuff looks good in the store, making sure the plant displays look clean. As all of you would know, you get to the retailers, they don't always look so good. They're not good with plants. It's not their specialty. They do good with hard goods that don't die and that you don't have to water. But in our case, so what we saw the need, and we basically, one of our first employees was actually one of the employees who worked with us in the greenhouse in Chilliwack, and she was looking at moving, and I hated to lose her because she was a really good person, and I came up with this idea around merchandising. It was really meant to say, make us look good in the stores, and we found that was one of those key, I would say was a key advantage in the end in terms of that service and what that did for our customers. It was another part of those partnership things.
And your business, like 60, 70% of it happens in spring. And you're ramping up for it and delivering. And how is that over the years? How have you got really good at that?
Yeah, so 60% of the business does happen in 6 weeks of the year. So it's intense. We always look forward to it, and we look up against it all together. We also look forward to it being done, but it's a rush. That's what spring's about, and it's intense. So probably how do we prepare for this? A big part is we're really focused on the data. We really like to watch our numbers. The numbers are key to managing the business, and this isn't just the end result financials. We call this SKU management. This is actually looking at what we're putting in the store, what's selling. And there's another key factor that I think is really good. Data is important, but it gives you information that you want to go out into stores and visit. And you can see often the data that you can actually see that actually when you walk the stores and say, oh, I see why that's not selling now. I can see we're displayed wrong or different things. So there's a lot of things that kind of determine success, a lot of planning to get ready for spring. One of the biggest things we have to manage is the carts that we move our plants on. So we have to track these things, and we have to know how many we've got in the pipe coming back, because if we don't track that, we can find out we're not going to meet our sales plan because there's no carts to put plants on.
Wow. And so this was one of many expansions, but you just see the acreage of expanding greenhouses. And I talked to you earlier and was speculating on some of your input costs, and I thought, boy, lighting has got to be up there, or hydro. But I imagine people probably biggest, but you don't have to give us numbers, but it's probably bigger than our hydro bill we see at home, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, definitely our biggest single cost is definitely labor. Labor is the biggest cost for sure. That can run 25 to 28% of sales. And then you've got, what would be the next one? Probably the input side of things is with your plants and soil and all that kind of thing. But yeah, hydro, gas, electric, it can be pretty expensive, especially when we have those snowstorms. We got to heat all those greenhouses. Plants or not, You got to heat them and you got to melt the snow off, because otherwise they're back on the ground, and that's not a good thing. Been there.
tell us about this property, because you bought the 80 acres,
Yep.
and then to raise capital at some point, I believe you sold 50 acres of
Right.
it, and later you bought those 50 acres back.
Yeah.
Tell me about that journey.
Yeah. So that was definitely probably 3 years, I think, into when we had bought the property on South Sumas Road that, we needed some cash to kind of, materialize some of these greenhouses that needed some work because they weren't all in good shape. And so we sold those 50 acres for, I want to say, I think it was about $137,000. That wasn't per acre. That was actually for the whole 50 acres, okay? So then...
Say what now?
So just to give you an example, just a couple of years ago, I think we bought some land and we paid exactly that per acre. So that kind of gives you a bit of a change on how things are. But so then we bought this land, these 50 acres, we bought this back. Oh man, I don't remember exactly, but I want to say probably prior to this particular expansion, probably about... It was about 2007 now that I think of it, around that time that we bought it. So, yeah, we paid, I think it was a little over $1 million for it. So the investor, we bought it from the same gentleman who actually bought it in the first place, who really did nothing more than sit on it and rent it to the farmers. So it was,
He did
well
pretty
on
good,
it. Yeah,
but-
he was smarter than I was.
But that was also you managing your finances. Did you ever at any point look to other sources of capital, whether it's venture capital or big loans or private equity?
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely kind of times in the business cycle that you could say, especially the earlier years, I have to say that, we were blessed to have like Wilma's parents, my parents, get us out of some tough situations. We definitely, we overran our cash a couple times and their help, you could say, kept us in business. But even beyond that, I think once you could say we were actually starting to expand the business and looking at how to raise cash to do that, I met with some people who would do what we call bridge financing or different things like that. And one of the guys I met with actually is, he's from Chilliwack, and really good guy. And we sat down and had coffee and, yes, he'd be happy to lend me money, but he did say to me, Stan, he says, but you don't make enough money in your business to actually pay what I need to charge you to do this, because there's a little bit more money in some of the other businesses, like some of the development stuff, than there would be in this type of agriculture. So in the end, we never did borrow money that way, and it probably was a good thing, because that way we didn't overgrow, the business.
And I see the parking lot there, and there's a number of semi-trucks. I think you said you now have 30 on the road.
Yeah.
Like it went from you just cruising down the highway yourself to now an absolute. Do you have perspective on this achievement, or are you just sort of in the grind doing it? Did you ever get a moment to go, wow, look what we did? Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because, I remember very clearly the person who worked for us for a number of years, and then one of his boys was working for us, and he came by once and we were talking, and he said to me, he said, Stan, he said, how big is big enough? And I kind of looked at him because I didn't know what he actually was trying to say. And so I said to him, I said, what do you mean by how big is big enough? He said, well, he says, you got this big place, and he says, isn't it enough? And I was actually kind of a little stumped because I didn't know what to say. And in my own mind, I never really thought about what big meant. And neither did I. It wasn't an ambition to become big. It was just, I want to say in a lot of ways, it was about the opportunity. And that's pretty much what I said to him. We actually grow because our customers need more. So we have two options. We can say, no, we're going to stay right here where we're at. So imagine I did that with Home Depot and they started with 2 stores. And I said, I'll supply those 2 stores, but we're kind of done after that. So they built more stores, and they got all the way to 28 stores. So if I would have said no, somebody else would have had to fill that gap. And had they have filled the gap, I probably wouldn't have the 2 stores I had anymore. Because that's part of, you grow with your customers. That's why we call it a partnership.
Mm-hmm. And they say, as you build a company, you want sort of defensible moat around it. And what is protecting those relationships with the big boxes, for example? Is it it must be a combination of things.
Yeah, I think the relationship is protected through performance. You obviously have to perform, and I think that's any business. Really critical that you could say that what you've sold you can deliver. And in our ideal world, this is really what I always like to achieve. First of all, what we sell a customer, we want to surpass that in delivery. So meaning that if we've given them a certain spec, we're going to grow a product to a certain quality. We want to hit that spec or better. Second thing we want to do, though, is if we made a forecast in terms of what and how big the program looks, we want to deliver that plus some. Because if we can technically over-deliver on what we sell, customer's happy. And then on top of that, it's the service aspect. Continue to deliver service, deliver timely, reduce the pain points. I always say to our sales team, I said, our job is to make sure that we reduce every pain point that a buyer could have. Because if you can take away their pain points, they like you.
In other areas of agriculture, there's been mass consolidation. Now Jan has a family in the prairies, so we did a road trip last year and went through some of the more rural areas, and you didn't see any farmhouses anymore. They were just tracts of massive acreage, and we were asking some of our relatives, and he said, well, these are all U.S. owned now, and there basically isn't anybody on the property other than the workers. And has that happened in your sector of the agriculture, or not so much?
Yeah, I think consolidation is pretty normal in every business, and I think there's a necessary component to that. So I think it's not that everybody has to be big. I don't think that's the case at all, because there are definitely niche opportunities in everything. But when you get to a certain size, you need a certain economy of scale to actually automate, to innovate in that. And when we look at agriculture, it's no different that way. If you don't have a certain critical size, you can't bring in the innovation, the technology that helps drive out the cost to actually, be efficient in what you do. In the meantime, I think it's really also critical, and this is probably an important thing to try to evaluate when you're in that early stage of business is try to think about which way you want to go. We ended up with the big box stores. We didn't know how big we were going to get. We really didn't. And some days you say, man, could we just stop? Could we freeze things right here? But this is the path we're on, and this is what works for us. But you can also decide to go to a different customer base that may not require you to grow at that speed, that might be satisfied with a pretty, let's say, a more modest level of growth in that. So I think you have to think about those kind of things when you go into business, and that can help set the path a little bit in how you might look at things.
Mm-hmm. This picture we're seeing is an empty greenhouse and a full greenhouse. How often does this turn over? Like, how long does this plant need to sit on the floor before it's ready to ship?
So I think those are fall mums, the picture on the right. So I think that's what we would sell in the garden centers in the fall. So it's kind of an instant color fall decor item for for the homes. On the left, you see the open floors. So that mum crop there would typically be about an 8 to 10 week crop from beginning to start. We have crops that take us in excess of a year. We have crops that take us a year and a half. But I would say our average crop time probably runs, especially spring, typically about 3 months. That's our average. Turn rate inside the greenhouses would be, we would turn probably on average around probably about 2 times. Not all our space is full. That's why it's only 2. Otherwise, ideally, it would be 3.
Got it. I look at the vertical space and I say, is there any way to put another row, or is it all you need that outside? Yeah.
It's so interesting enough. So that's floor space, which you see there on the right, but we also use hanging basket systems in the greenhouses as well.
Got it.
So depending on the type of crop you grow, that gives us hanging baskets for spring that people need. So we leverage that area as well. You could look at. We had a lot of areas in a greenhouse, what we call common area space. Picture yourself in a mall and, you rent that space, but then there's common area space that nobody really uses, just people walk on it. They get from place to place. We have the same thing in a greenhouse. So our goal is to really try to utilize common area space because we're still heating it and we paid for it.
Got it. Along the way, you made the decision to go to Alberta.
Yep.
Tell me about the thought process there and what was driving that.
So Alberta was kind of a natural opportunity for us, and there were 2 things kind of going on when the thought of Alberta came up, and it came from two things. One, it was an opportunity, but secondly, we had a customer that had a need. And it was about, we were shipping a lot of stuff into Alberta at this time. And what we found is the delivery time was simply too long. And that's critical, especially in the springtime when you're trying to get those quick turns and, fulfill the demand. So that's one of the things that had us looking. So we had two opportunities kind of presented. One was the idea of Alberta. And the second thing was a greenhouse facility that was for sale in Langley on a bankruptcy sale, which we had put a bid in on, and we thought we were going to own it. And then they decided to reopen the bidding, and Wilma and I talked about this, and we just said, you know what? But if we go and bid higher and try to do this, we're certainly not going to Alberta for a number of years because it's going to take all the cash we have. And we just thought we should go to Alberta because that's the bigger picture. So that's what took us to Alberta.
And from a management standpoint, just the logistical side of things, you're a family-owned business. You're on the ground. How did you managing this facility in another province?
Probably definitely was a big challenge in terms of just, overcoming that thought. But I think one of the biggest wins that we had is my brother actually lived out there, and he grew up working with me together in Rosedale greenhouses with my dad at the time. And I convinced my brother John to effectively be the manager for us on the site. So him and his wife moved to the place, and actually they managed it for us, I want to say, for 3 to 4 years. Following that, my nephew was being groomed by my brother at that time, and he actually took off and ran, and he then took over from my brother. So we had, I think, for one, you could say there was a strong level of trust, which is really important. When you're talking an operation in a different area, you really need to have that ability to say, trust the people you're working with. Since then, we've moved on. We've had 2 different site managers probably over the last 12 years there now, both, non-family members, and it's also working very good. But we also we're better with our systems in terms of what we need and that. So these are all the growing pains kind of as you start having a site in another area. But you know what? Our Rosedale site can almost seem like it's in Alberta too sometimes.
Fair enough. Whereabouts in Alberta?
This is in southern Alberta, close to Lethbridge.
Okay. We drove through there recently, and there's just a tremendous amount of windmills now. It's incredible, all that popping up. And of course, that wasn't enough. You needed to add more. And then I imagine your hydro bill in Alberta is even steeper with the deep temperatures in the winter. Tell us some examples of what took you by surprise by this Alberta expansion.
So first of all, Alberta can get cold. I don't know how many of you are all from Alberta, but Alberta can get, like this year, it got to minus 40, for a couple days there. And that is just like bitter cold if you've never experienced that. You can just about freeze your nose off, actually. But yes, it requires a lot of heat. And we got these things called boilers, which actually heat the place. And they have massive gas pipelines that go into them. And they're just sucking gas back all day long. And you're really not doing anything more than just keeping the place alive is really what you're trying to do. So when it's that extreme, you basically focus on the plants, the areas where really need the heat, and you basically kind of starve the areas that don't need it quite as much. You just got to keep it from freezing. So a lot can go wrong when it's that cold. 40 below, you don't want to have a boiler stop. So you have to have a lot of, in our case, we find it's very important to really in-house a lot of our maintenance stuff, and that we have to be able to solve our problems. We don't have time, to wait for somebody to come in and help us.
So over the course of a 30-year plus business, you've been building out the team. It's not just Stan and Wilma anymore. In fact, you've got, at the height of a season, you have 800 people working for you. And then I believe the core team is around 200, 250, something like that. There's a point where, I don't know, I can maybe remember 25 names. Like, how do you keep your finger on this? And I know you've got a tremendous team that you've begun to build out, and you're saying even this needs to be updated. But it seems like so much of this is between you two. How have you let go of things and nurtured that growth in other people?
So first of all, I'd say it's tough. It's tough letting go. You enjoy doing what you're doing, and you learn year over year. You continue to learn every day, actually. And Wilma and I we enjoyed it. We loved doing the business. So, but as the company grows, you find you need to grow other team members. And not only that, you need to trust them. So you have to develop a relationship that allows them to grow, that allows them to make mistakes also, because that also happens. We made mistakes, they're going to make mistakes as well. And that's a big part of building the team. I think I want to say, we call it coming beside the team members. You work beside them. And I think any of our team members, especially the ones that know me from, maybe not so much the last 5 years, but certainly before that, I could be the guy pictured running through the greenhouse. I could be the guy sweeping the floor, all those kind of things. So those are important things. I think you set an example, you lead by example. I think that's a really key point. But back to building the team. As the business does get a lot bigger, really important to try to think of what you need. What kind of structure do you need? I see ourselves just in the last 5-6 years now where the business has almost doubled in volume. And COVID was in between there. A lot happened those years too, so a lot of growth in those years. But in some ways, we didn't grow our team as much as maybe we should. We didn't focus enough on. Sometimes you think, you're doing really good. You could double the size, no problem. But there's other problems that start popping up, and you have to have. The bigger the company is, it needs structure. It needs to have data. People have to. The team members that you work with have to have the parameters in how they make decisions, because they're working for you. They're trying to make you successful in that way. So, pulling back, what does that mean? So Wilma and I are 60. So we're working on the succession strategy we have now for almost 2 years. So the children have expressed strong desire to keep the company going, which is wonderful. And sometimes we wonder why, but we won't go there. But on the other hand, I think that speaks to their desire to see that the challenge continue as well. But it's also been a very good business for us. It's, our family, all of our employees have very much, I think, been a part of the growth. We've had many employees that are 20 plus years, even 25 years with us. And you could say they also depend on the business. So for us to basically now look forward, it's like the next step is for them to see that we now have the next generation also coming in, and they have the same values and how they're going to carry the business forward, and that they can depend on that as employees as well. So that's where we're at right now.
A really innovative program that you put into place and have been a pioneer around was a temporary foreign worker program, and I believe this was spearheaded by the province, but you really took it to the horns. And how many folks do you have every year out? I think it's primarily Mexico.
Yeah, I think so. Between the two sites, Alberta and here, I want to say I'm just going to round the numbers and say that there's probably close to about 250 what we call temporary foreign workers and seasonal agriculture worker programs. The difference between the two programs, the temporary foreign worker program is a 2-year program, and the seasonal agriculture worker program runs a maximum of 8 months, really geared towards a harvest cycle or a planting cycle. That's kind of how that's geared. So yeah, the fun part is, and this is where, I think it's really great. This is probably some of the things that got me involved in things like the advocacy work and, being involved in committees and that. You partner together with people in your community to grow opportunities. And I saw that with the Chilliwack Ag Commission. So I was on the Chilliwack Ag Commission at that time, and we came up with this need. We just cannot find enough domestic people that are willing to do this kind of work. And we decided to go down this road, but then we had to deal with housing, because we really didn't think it was going to be wise to have them housed off-site, because we felt if they're on-site, you kind of got some control of things. But there were other dilemmas. Our kids were very young at that point. Wilma and I said, is this good? But so we developed the housing strategy with the city of Chilliwack. I think we were the pilot actually at the time. It was a pilot program in those days. And that turned out to be a wonderful program, I think, for all of agriculture, because it's used heavily in agriculture today. But the other thing was just the experience we had as a family, our employees. It was wonderful. These guys are happy. They love what they're doing. They're sending money back to their families. They're putting their kids through university and that kind of thing. And not only that, but probably the other aspect that we found was really wonderful is just how it worked for our employees. because we wondered, would they be intimidated? Would they be concerned? Would they feel that this affects my job? No, they didn't actually. They actually really found that it actually enabled them to not be stuck doing the same monotonous work, and it allowed us all to have less stress. So it has been a great program for us.
Any downsides? Like any challenges from, NAFTA, border, just paperwork, all of that stuff? Or has there been partners to help you along the way?
So you're talking across the board?
Yeah, no, with this particular program of transporting workers, recruiting in Mexico, etc.
So the program is actually been in Canada for quite some years now. I want to say 20 some years. It came to BC a little bit later than it did with Ontario, but I think Wilma and I stick handled most of it at the beginning for sure, and did the paperwork and brought in the first guys. It's actually, you make an application, you work with the consulate in Mexico. There's kind of a joint working relationship between Canada and Mexico. You bring in and these people. We had no idea who they were going to be. They all have Spanish names,
right?
So which I can't say most of, but and not only that, but they don't all speak English. So we had to kind of learn a little bit show and tell stuff in that. I would say just the process was, we were early stages of this. This was very new to British Columbia at this point, so it wasn't being used heavily. We didn't have a lot of go-tos, but I want to say we had, again, back to say, so Chilliwack Ag Commission, on the housing side. We had some other ag organizations such as the British Columbia Agriculture Council. Some of them. So you could say some of the networking I did over the years, learning and connecting with people really did help open doors. Okay, you can talk to this person. They can help you with that. So I believe that community networking really delivers in a big way when you're traveling untreaded ground.
And then your merchandising team, we touched on that, but that's up to, I believe, hundreds of workers that work seasonally in these retail outlets.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother endeavor.
Yeah, that program's, that's close to 400 or 500 people now, and it's maybe more than that. But that's all domestic people. So
right.
Largely, it's largely for spring. We have a core merchandising group of probably, I want to say, about 70 year round, and they'll work in all provinces from here all the way to Manitoba. But they'll also it's also made up of a big spring component. So right now we're in hiring mode, and we got to bring on, say, close to, say, 400 or 500 people, literally over the next probably 6 weeks. So,
wow.
In BC it starts a little bit earlier, Alberta it's a little bit later, Saskatchewan a little bit later again. And so, yeah, a lot of hiring. It's meant to be temporary. You mentioned your son as
right.
well doing it. So it can be a lot of students, but it can also be a lot of, we'll also see sometimes retired people do this job, because it's actually, it's physical. It's nice work. Some people don't like it. Other people love it.
Right. And this is how your product shows up in stores.
Yeah.
And you have this Color Your Life brand that's sub to Rainbow, but it's pretty innocuous, and it just, you probably see that on tags. What was the thought behind that?
So we went to Australia actually one year, and we were looking for how to say create a bit of a brand for a company. It was actually the company that makes the plastic tags like this in the company went to, and they actually they said, we can develop a brand for you. So they developed the logo we have right now, as well as that brand Color Your Life. So it's a trademark brand, and it does not carry a lot of weight, such as something like in the plant business. You also have another brand called Proven Winners, which some of you might have heard of. That's a brand of plants that's very heavily advertised, and there's a lot of consumers that have grown to trust that brand. Our brand doesn't carry that kind of Nike effect, if I could put it that way. So for us, the brand is how to leverage that. I think that's definitely something we will look at in the next couple of years as the children get more involved in it. There will be some opportunities around creating, let's say, leveraging a brand a little bit more and seeing how that can create value or create trust in terms of a consumer buying decision.
Yeah, but I can see how the IKEA and Home Depot, it's not really competing. It's there. It's okay. It's a nice brand, but it's not necessarily something that conflicts or they're concerned about you having too much stature. No, I think it works really well. technology obviously has been a huge issue. You've got things like lighting. Tell me about the advent of LED, and were you able to take advantage of that, and was there any savings?
Yeah. So LED is an interesting journey for us. So we all know, LED promised a lot of things. It's going to save us an awful lot of money, right? That was one of the big things. And these lights will last forever, right? That was probably two big selling features that I kind of recall. So 2008, we put the first LED lights in. We were probably, early adopters in the LED inside the greenhouse facilities at that point. Really cool lights. They're bright, and this here's orange. This is what we call HBS lights. So, but LED gives you a really purple skyline, and so we put these lights in, and you have to put these lights in, and then you want to run them for about a straight 24 hours in order to get them what we call burnt in. So we did that, and it just so happened to be that the day we turned these things on, we got this real low fog that came in, and this low fog, like these lights, they just they just lit up the sky in that corner of Chilliwack, and we were sitting in the house, and it's like the people were going down the road, and we were saying, like, what's going on? There's so many people going down the road. Then the fire trucks went down the road. Well, it turned out it was the sky, and we actually went outside and saw, okay, well, now we know what's going on.
Yeah, we drive down Keith Wilson to get home, and we can see rainbow in the distance, all purple. So yeah.
So technology?
Yeah. Was there a savings? And I think now you're on third generation LED. Is the promise finally realizing some?
We're going to find out.
Okay.
So yes, those 2008 ones, we're on to third generation. We did not have the successes. They lasted about 3 years on average. And so we're really hoping now, because the fixture is it's like 3-4 times the money of a typical fixture. So there has to be ideally some ROI. So energy-wise, there's a savings of about 30%. So that is significant, but when you're talking a $1,200 fixture versus $250, you got to run a lot of hours to support that cost. So we definitely need them to last more than 3 years. So, but automation. So greenhouses are very techy. There's a lot going on inside of a greenhouse. So everything from the lighting to the heating to the watering to the humidity, all these things, the temperatures are all controlled with what we call a climate control system. And it's quite advanced in terms of how it can manage. And those are the tools we use to manage the crops. And, we always say this is in agriculture in general, but one of the big things is give, call it your cows or your plants, the ultimate climate or environment. They'll be happy and they'll produce for you. And that's the same thing with plants.
I think of the contract on a large photocopier, and there's always the copy guy out that's fixing it. I imagine you've had to become quite self-reliant in your own tech and fixing stuff as it breaks, or are you really dependent on vendors and technology companies with all of this?
Yeah. So technology is a big part of it, and you're always trying to you're trying to leverage the technology. You're trying to adopt new technology. It's very much part of what our business does. As far as that self-sufficiency in terms of keeping the facilities running, keeping the technology running, because technology does have its challenges. So first of all, connectivity is a big thing. Make sure that you've got, the pipe, what we call it, for the internet coming in to support, all the technology. In our case, we have fiber at the business there. That's normal in town, but it's not in the country. Okay. But that's a big deal in terms of just having the access. So you want to have availability to everything you do. If I'm in Mexico, ideally, but you also need to have certain of your service providers also have access to it. They need to be able to see, what's going on. So if a boiler goes down and the control goes down, that's typically you're going to call somebody in with a higher level of expertise on the controller. If it's the boiler itself, it's a motor, it's an electrical issue, those things we try to do as much as possible in-house, largely because of the turnaround time.
I've jumped ahead here, but I've got one more question on the tech side. Robotics. You see all of these robot arms and so forth. Have you been able to leverage that? And how does that work with your human folks as well?
Yeah. So we have a lot of repetitive work in our business. So one of the biggest things that we did, like when we started in business, I wasn't fast planter, but my wife and some of the other people were very fast with planting. So you plant a plant that's about as big as my pinky into a cell, and that just takes time. So it's like picking berries. If anybody knows how to pick berries, some people are really good at it. I wasn't very good at it. So one of the things that we learned is the automation allows us to get the job done. That's probably the biggest single benefit of automation. We simply could not hire enough people to plant all these plants we have. So the automation is one of the tools to get it done. But optimizing the automation drives the efficiency levels. And now you can start getting what I call ROI or payback on it. So we're constantly looking at the opportunities to, say, drive costs out of the business, keep ourselves as efficient as possible. And that really comes from just saying, okay, this piece of equipment's, say, $250,000, like, how badly do we need it? What's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of what we call the ROI? Like, are we going to get a payback on this machine, or is it an absolute necessity because we just simply cannot find the people to do it? There can be different things that drive the decision.
Last question on tech. AI is the biggest buzzword going. Have you found ways, or at least piqued your curiosity on, I imagine climate control might have some learning aspect to it. Or are there other areas where artificial intelligence might help in the greenhouse?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of opportunity up ahead. And I'll give you an example. It was probably about 5 years ago. We were at a trade show, and I met with a company that was doing really AI, ultimately, you could say. And it was around inventory and crop management. And the real focus was really about, they were going to use a camera system that would go through the greenhouse, literally take ongoing pictures as it rolled through the greenhouse, and it would actually capture each plant. And when it did that, it actually was kind of, picture as pixels. So with those pixels, they came up with detail about this leaf. And what they could also do with that is they could determine, just say by that, when they started creating certain benchmarks on these, on the pixel, you might say, they could determine whether this plant was in stress, whether it needed water, whether it had bugs, all these kind of things. So ultimately, the AI would be used to compute and ultimately translate into these different things. And I believe that's really the point of the future for agriculture, and that's what's going to drive future decision making. And I'll give you an example of some of the big wins. The big wins is when you can use AI to forecast as a person with a visual eye looking at this plant. I can have 5 different people look at this plant and determine what we call spec, breadth, height, leaf quality, all these kind of things. 5 different opinions. Those 5 different opinions don't necessarily cut it when you're trying to get it to a customer if you sold a spec. So because of today's level of specs and that, it's really important that we actually get spec correct. So if I can define spec correct and I can use AI to develop what that spec is, I get to a point where I can more accurately forecast what I call my availability for this given week. So they're using this very heavily in things like, say, in California and strawberry fields and that kind of thing. And they fly drones over and they're calculating, but they can forecast with calculating weather forecasts, the amount of rain, temperatures, all these things together, crop response, knowing how it responded in the past. All this data together formulates a much more accurate forecast on what's going to be available.
Cool. Succession. You mentioned a little bit. I believe you have 6 children. Is that right?
5.
5. So, thank you, Wilma. Have they been involved in the business from early days? You mentioned that you're not a good planter. Is that the truth, or do you just say I'm not good at it? But tell me about your kids and how they've been in the business.
So first of all, yes. So right here, this picture, we have 3, 4, I think 4 of the kids at work right there already. So some of them were some friends as well. So yes, our kids work very early. They worked well before 14, and some of the 2 of the girls are here with us, Anna Marie and Lorraine. And they were very much part of this. So I think, Anna Marie, I believe this is you at the time. And so we were tie-strapping heating pipes at that time. They were way better and faster at this than me, for sure. So I would do kind of some of the bigger grunt work. They would do these kind of things because they were faster at it. But we actually really enjoyed working together as a family. I think, right from day one, Wilma and I packed flowers all the time together. We did sales trips together, delivered flowers together. But even the children, as we went through the business, I mean, we packed these flowers together. We loaded trucks. I mean, these kids, they worked hard. They came in after school, and they'd start labeling plants for us because we had to put these things called UPC stickers on the plants at that time. We had to pack them into. You guys did so many stickering jobs, I remember. But also just say packing up, loading the trucks, getting it ready for the truck to go out the next day, and that. So often we'd work till sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night, and also huge benefits because they all know how to do that today. But they were also able to build some cash in the bank, and that allowed them to do things. So yeah, I don't think any of our kids would say they worked too hard when they were younger.
Speaking of child employment, she is over 14, and I did fail to thank Elise. She's doing all of this wonderful video switching. If you can put yourself on the screen there, Elise, you can see her in her domain. She's pressing the right buttons and then making us look and sound good. But yes, it's wonderful to work with your kids and learn with them. And so this is another, as they're growing, and I know that the 3 boys have taken an interest in the business, and this was a neat photo you supplied. With Joel, who's your VP of Operations, and Alan, who's a VP of Infrastructure. And your younger son, I think he's in school and doing it part-time. Tell me about that transition and how you're navigating that and what that looks like in the future.
Yeah. It takes a lot of patience. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have to learn, still keep learning, reminding myself of is there's no such thing as just taking the chip and moving it and trading it. It's not going to happen. We all have to learn, every one of us. And there's just certain lessons that you can talk about, but you have to experience them. And I think that's a big part of what I think we're experiencing. I think definitely the boys actively in, and even the girls and the different things they do as well. Lorraine and her husband have a concrete pumping business, and Ray works as a nurse. They all do different things, and you have to learn yourself certain things. So back to the working together, I think the really important thing is to continue communicating and to be patient with each other. Sometimes we can be passionate about different things, and we can see things a certain way, and sometimes we can just talk past each other. That can happen as well. It's really important to kind of take that step back and try to understand each other, and I think so far we've been very successful doing that. It's like, it doesn't mean that you don't have difficult days and you wonder, man, how could I said something differently, or why did I say it this way? But I think it's really important to have those conversations. But it's also, so back to succession again, what we're now doing is we have a coach who's working with us and really trying to share, she's extracting the learnings from what we've learned, Wilma and I, along the way, and trying to impart those, to hopefully the new operators and help them understand why. So, last session was about, so we had a strategy. What was strategy over the years? So obviously we didn't have a lot of strategy in some ways. Some days, it was like you took the opportunity and went with it. But there were certain strategies, and there were objectives in how we did things. And that comes down to, how do you make those decisions? How do you make a decision to build a greenhouse in Alberta? What things come into play? What are the risks that are associated with that? And how will you mitigate those risk impacts? So those are all the things we're trying to share and learn together now.
Have you found any challenges, or how are you navigating? It's a family-owned business. There's going to be succession to new leaders within the family. You have a really robust leadership team. I imagine you have to build respect and trust amongst that, and how's that going?
In relation to the next generation?
Yeah, in the relationship to, we're going to have new bosses eventually, right?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's gone very well so far. So first of all, I would say, I think for a lot of, I would say for all of our employees in general, I think there's strong buy-in and there's comfort level. I think it added a sense of security for most employees. They actually now see, first of all, I think as the boys being actively involved in the operations, I believe every employee, they don't see a difference in attitude. They see the same approach. So there's a confidence that nothing's going to change. We're going to keep operating the business the same way. They come alongside the people in the same way. We use this word called humility, and we think it's really important in terms of how we work with our teams, how they feel like they're valued, and also it's also important that we demonstrate to them that our approach is we'll work with you on this. We'll work together. Sometimes there's tougher things than that, but in general, the trust is strong. And I think that's what I see the employees see.
Well, fantastic. I really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing the Rainbow Greenhouses story and your launch story. So let's hear it for Stan. I've only got so many good questions. We've got a mic there. If we could pass that around, I'm sure you've got better questions than I do. And we'll throw the audience lights on, Elise, just so we've got some light in that shot. Directing from here.
Thanks so much for being here and sharing your story. It's tremendous to learn about the growth there. Looking forwards, if there was one data point that was difficult to get that would help you succeed more. So thinking about the AI and whatnot, looking forwards, what would be the toughest data point to get where you see the most value if you could get it?
The most important data point. I don't know if I would call this the most important, but I think what is very important as general is having very good understanding of what is not working well. Like those things that allow the fine tuning is probably the most important data for us. And the reason why that's hard to get for us is it can be hard on teams to commit to. It's hard to get data sometimes. It does create extra work. It creates a need for being very intentional about the data you want to get, and then tracking it. And there can be sometimes I think the challenge can be there doesn't appear to be the quick win. We all kind of want to see some result from something, and if we can't demonstrate what I call some quick wins along the way, it can be really challenging to get that data.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Going once? Nobody? Okay. Well, let's hear it for Stan.
Well, thank you.
Yes.